welcome everyone. This is the Buddhist Action Coalition in conversation with Paul Hawken. My name is Donna. I'm a Buddhist Action Coalition member. Welcome to everyone. I am super excited to be hosting Paul this evening. I've actually followed his work for God, going on a few decades now. Since I read the book Growing a Business, I think in the early 90s. And Paul, for those of you not familiar with him, is an environmentalist entrepreneur, author, and activist who has dedicated his life to environmental sustainability and changing the relationship between business and the environment. He is one of the environmental movement's leading voices and a pioneering architect of corporate reform with respect to ecological practices. His work includes founding successful, ecologically conscious businesses, writing about the impacts of commerce on living systems, and consulting with heads of state and CEOs on economic development, industrial ecology, and environmental policy. Paul is the founder of Project Drawdown, a nonprofit dedicated to researching when and how global warming can be reversed. The organization maps and models the scaling of 100 substantive technological, social, and ecological solutions to global warming. And his latest book is Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. It is full of awesome, yes, I'll hold up our pictures, awesome information and just, wonderful, wonderful info and just inspiring stories of people doing wonderful things, as well as where that work really, what needs to be done. I have many underlines and notes in the margins for in my copy. Anyway, so yes, welcome, Paul. Is there anything you would like to? I have a bunch of questions that I wrote down. So I'll start off with that. But and then if other people have questions too, you can put them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. But Paul, is there anything that you would like to say before I kind of dive in?
Thank you, first of all. Even though we were sort of in the Zoom gloom of silence while we're waiting for everybody to come, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be really helpful for us just to gather together and have a minute of intentional silence before we speak. It's how we start everything at regeneration.org anyway. And I would love to do that with you all, because you know the power of silence and meditation. So
that sounds awesome. So Dorothea, can you keep time for a minute?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay. So Paul, is there anything you would like to say to start us off, or?
I just want to say thank you for coming together tonight. And I'm in Baja El Pescadero on the unceded land of the Guaycura indigenous people who were pretty much abolished by the Jesuits for their for many reasons. And so I just want to pay respect and honor those peoples and where we are tonight, where I am tonight.
Thank you for that.
Could you say their name again?
Guaycura, Guaycura.
Thank you.
Okay. So Paul, so you are a Buddhist. One of the many reasons we wanted to have you here this evening. How has your Buddhism influenced the work that you do, both in terms of the starting your businesses and the way you run your businesses, the environmental work?
Well, let's see. I grew up in Berkeley, California, and so that was a time of Alan Watts and later Gary Snyder, and so those are influences on my father and my father's friends, not on them directly. And then when I was 24, I went to Japan, and both for business reasons, Erewhon, food, but also for practice. I wouldn't call myself, I call myself a rather inept Buddhist, by the way, so I wouldn't, I'm still, that's why it's called practice, right?
Right.
And I think the first book that I did that really was profoundly influenced by practice was Blessed Unrest in 2007. And then on this book, Regeneration, it's interesting because Jack Kornfield is on the board of directors of regeneration.org. And what I was doing every day, and still do, but was just reading all RSS feeds from nature, the nature of that, science, and this. I mean, all the information is coming in every day about climate and impacts it's having, and biodiversity, the sort of zeitgeist about what people were thinking, saying, what people weren't doing, and the angst and accompanying jargonization of it. But that I take that in every day to sort of know what I'm writing and speaking into. And but it gets pretty heavy. And so I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and I'm like, and I would turn on the Jack's podcast. He has 135 of them, by the way. And I know them by heart now. I can finish his sentences and I know all his good jokes. I've heard them so many times. But it really did have a profound influence on me in the day. And the last thing I wanted to do is write a text or a book that had any ism attached to it, because the purpose of regeneration is to write in a way that creates accessibility and permeability from readers from all different beliefs, certain practices, or people of different ethnic origins and so forth. So it's meant to be fairly universal in how it languages. And so, but if I can go through that, I can just keep pointing to you to things. Okay, this is Jack, and this is that, and I got that from, podcast number 73. That was a really great idea. So it did permeate it, and it's sort of like a. But it was never an attempt anyway to move people's sensibility towards anything other than who they are right now. And an example of that, Donna, is that I very easily could have said at the outset of the book that everything's connected, which is a truism that's both trite and true. I mean, it's just a cliche. And it's systems theory 101 and a lot of other things on the spiritual level. But what I did in the book is in the specific sections, I would make connections like this is connected to that, and sort of, oh, who knew? Wow, I didn't know. And like, so to make connections, to create this spaciousness for the reader, to at some point for him or her to say, wow, everything's connected, and rather than, in other words, to change their own mind or to let their mind emerge and grow into something. And one of the things that I've tried to do and learn as a writer is not to try to change people's minds,
Mm.
because you can't, first of all. And second, I know how hard it is to change my mind. So why in the heck would I try to change somebody else's? And so the writing in there is very much meant to be factual and informative and narrative and so forth. It is undergirded by 7,262 citations. So, I mean, but there's no footnotes, there's no scientism, there's no jargonizing, there's, I hope, unless it's defined in use. And so again, like the prior book, Drawdown, is taught from 4th grade to MIT graduate school. And I wanted to create another book that had that span, had that breadth, for people to understand regeneration, because regeneration to me is innate to being a human being. It's not out there. It's not some scientific term. It's not it's had nothing to do with climate. It has everything to do with climate, of course. But I mean, in the sense, it's never been used by the climate establishment or the climate movement. And so the word regeneration is, I define it as putting life at the center of every act and decision, I mean, the book is basically Shantideva in drag, okay? It's like,
I like that description.
But regeneration, putting life at the center of every act and decision, is different than the economic system and that we live within right now. And every economic sector, without exception, every service that we receive, every product that we purchase or receive, you don't have to go very far down and pull the string on the flower bag to go down the supply chain, and what you find is it's taking life, it's extractive, it's harming life, in many cases destroying life. And it's not anybody's intention. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I can't wait to figure out what I can kill today. But that's what we all do unintentionally by the choices we make and the information that we don't have really about our clothing, about our food, about our furniture, about so many things that we do. And so from my point of view, we had reached, I think, especially, I think you can all feel it in this year and last year, but sort of an inflection point in society, that where climate and the climate crisis and the climate emergency and global warming were concepts for people. They heard about it, they read about it, or they ignored it, or whatever, but it was a concept. Future existential threat is what we heard for 40 years. And I feel like in the last 18 months, in particular last 12 months, it's changed from conceptual to experiential. That is, if it's vicariously experiential, still experiential. Somebody whose house burned down. I'm talking about the West Coast now.
Mm.
And you know them and what they had, the suffering and the dislocation, the disruption. People who were flooded, people who have, been really profoundly affected. More people drowned in New Jersey from Hurricane Ida than Louisiana. How could that be? How could that possibly be? And so there is now, I think, an opening for people, and you kind of felt that around the press and around the Conference of the Parties, COP26 in Glasgow. There was a lot of tension and sense of urgency, which is right, about it, that you never really saw before in the same way, in the same level. And so I feel like like I said, are at a teachable moment for a lot of people. There's an openness that there wasn't there before. But at the same time, I feel like what I call climate speak, okay, has not been helpful and well intended. But what you hear and read constantly is we're going to fight climate change. We're going to tackle it. We're going to combat it. We're going to conquer it. And, you know, acronyms and metrics and but these war and sports metaphors as verbs, you know, I have there's three problems with fighting climate change. You know, those are three words. There's three problems. One is um, that it's a fight, and it's not a fight. First of all, there is nothing to fight. Um, and it's this othering language. If you're fighting something else, you have othered whatever else is, a person, ethnicity, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter. You have now othered that thing from you. You've separated yourself. And second, this thing about, and this is such Jack tells a story of like fighting change. What an interesting idea. That's not a very Buddhist concept. and but it's not even true. You can't fight change.
And I've heard you say that you actually, like, if somebody asks you, if you meet somebody and they ask you, you know, what you do, what you write about, that you actually don't use the phrase climate change.
No, I don't.
So you're sort of starting to go in that direction. So I'll just kind of, you know, throw that question out now. So can you say, you've already kind of laid out like pretty much why you don't use that phrase, but do you want to say more about that and like how you do answer questions like that without using the phrase climate change?
Yeah, I don't want to use it because the climate is supposed to change. That's what it does. And nothing's going to stop it. And if climate didn't change, we wouldn't have glaciers, rivers, oceans, bees, hummingbirds, beavers, ripe peaches. I mean, come on. That's because climate changes.
And my conservative relatives who don't believe in anthropomorphic, you know, climate change or anthropogenic climate change, I should say, will say like, well, the climate's always been changing, you know,
They're
as a
absolutely
way
right.
of saying like, well, you know,
I would agree with him. We'd be right there. We'd be doing pinky shakes on that one. I did a talk for Oracle, and it's for CIOs, Chief Information Officers. And I don't know how many of you, you know, do speeches or, you know, talks and so forth, but every so often you realize that you have been served up. In other words, eat your spinach, you know, and this is the speaker, this is Mr. Spinach, and you audience. In other words, nobody there wanted to listen to me at all. They were there, there's 3,000 of them to get up to date on the newest software for their corporations or their institutions, you know, from Oracle. And I could just feel it, you know, in the audience before I spoke, just what was being said and this and that and the tender. And so when I got up there, the first thing I said is, how many people here do not believe in climate change? And then there was maybe 150 hands rose. And I said, you know, it's cool. It's okay. Whatever you think and feel, it's fine with me. No judgment whatsoever. I said, let me ask again. And another 150 or so raised their hand, you know, maybe 10% of them. I said, this isn't a trick question, but every single one of you should have raised your hand because science is not a belief system. It's evidentiary. And your CIOs, and if you went to your CEO, your boss, and said, I got this hunch that maybe we should delay the shipment in China and not get these containers of this, and I think if we just, you'd be fired like that, because that's not how you manage a supply chain. And the way we, you know, think about climate is based solely on evidence. It's not about emotion or belief, you know. And so that's why I would do a pinky shake with your, it's like, absolutely, it's always changing. And that's why the term is incorrect. It's really reversing global warming. And warming is what changes two things. What? It changes ocean currents and the jet stream. And the interaction between itself, ocean currents and the jet stream, and then between the other, one to the other, is fluid dynamics, one of the most complex sciences in the world in terms of the math, and which makes it so difficult to model climate. And those create the climate. The interaction between the jet stream and the ocean creates climate, and of course climate creates weather. But the idea that somehow it's out there, like Bill Gates says, we can fix it, and I really appreciate his enthusiasm, but there's no it. Where is it? Yeah.
So how do you then describe what you do? Like,
Oh,
so rather than using the term climate change or anything, like, how do you describe what you do? Because I've actually heard you answer this question before, and you had a great, your answer to it was I thought really was good. So,
I probably won't remember it, but I will. When I wrote the prior book for Drawdown, and I started that in 2001, I was asking, sort of like Diogenes, looking for a wise person, but I was puzzled because the third assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had come out in 2001, just about 6 months prior to 9/11. And I read the summary report, and it was more dire than the second, which is, they're successively more dire and pessimistic, of course. And I began to ask people in universities and NGOs, why don't we have a list of the most substantive solutions to reverse global warming? In fact, why don't we even name the goal? Because mitigation, fighting, combating, those aren't goals, those are verbs. Verbs are not goals. And so nobody, even then, they're talking about net zero in 2050, okay, but net zero is not a goal either. It's a threshold, and what a wonderful threshold that would be, but the goal is to reverse global warming. The goal is to bring that CO2 back to Earth where it came from. And it is food for living beings and the Earth itself and from the biosphere. So it's not a pollution, it's actually food. And so I wanted to name the goal and then to see if that was possible, that the solutions we had in hand at that time. And I talked to people for a couple of years, 3 years, and they said, great idea, or we don't do that, or we don't have the money to do it, we don't know how to do it, why don't you do it? And I said, if I knew how to do it, I wouldn't ask you. And it just died in that sense until 2013, when I felt there was just a lot of fear came up, which is justified, and I thought that was really Bill McKibben's piece, Global Warming's Terrifying New Math in Rolling Stone, and I could just feel my colleagues saying it was game over, and we tried, we failed, and I thought that when you give up, as you well know, it's often that teachable, it's an opening, it's not a closure, actually, when you give up. And so that's why I started to create Drawdown, and but so I feel like it's really important to have a goal that's unreasonable in our life. And if you have a reasonable goal, that means you already know how to do it.
Okay.
And you're not going to learn much that way. And we learn and we innovate and we imagine and we create in really marvelous ways when we're trying to, when we struggle too, but we're struggling to figure out something to, that we don't know, and we talk to other people and they don't know either, and then we get in groups and we try to figure out together. But it's unreasonable goals that actually bring out the best in human beings. And so to me, reversing global warming, can we just put that stake in the ground, please? Thank you very much. Instead of net zero or reduction or, all these sort of things. And so that was my purpose in Drawdown. When I was writing it, and before I finished it, I knew I'd be writing Regeneration, because whereas Drawdown was what we could do, definitely. These were solutions at hand. We knew them. They were scaling. We even did the economics of them. Regeneration was not what to do, it's how to do it. And so the most important important part of the book is not the book. It's actually the website. And the book is like a neurotransmitter. The last 8 pages is like a wormhole to the website. And the most important part of the website is Nexus. And it is the most complete listing and network of solutions, climate solutions in the world, and how to get them done by all levels of agency, whether an individual or company or community, neighborhood, etc.
And I encourage everyone to go to the website and check out the Nexus section. It's quite impressive. It is quite impressive. There's just tons of info, tons of ideas, tons of ways to actually put these things into practice. So yes, please go and check that out. So yeah. Go ahead. I'm interested to get your perspective on something that I feel like I've been noticing in general, like just at the point of history that we're in. It seems like there's two trajectories that are happening simultaneously that I see. One is what I would call a negative one, towards kind of anti-democracy, towards authoritarianism, towards climate breakdown, etc. And one is what I would call a more positive one, towards a and it towards a greater recognition of the interconnectedness of everything, which you were referring to before. We understand more now about mycelial networks and how trees communicate with each other. And I would also look at the resurgence of like psychedelic medicine as being a part of this. And I honestly, I don't remember if it was your concept or someone else's concept that like when there are these problems in life, that there's also this like sort of immune system that kicks in. But I wonder, I wonder like where this is all going, and like, is one trajectory going to kind of win out over the other, or are they going to, how are they going to interact with each other? Because both seem to be gaining steam simultaneously. And I sometimes wonder, like, are we going to go through a period of like real difficulty and violence and authoritarianism, and then out of that these other ideas are going to be able to grow and flourish after that has sort of spent itself? Or will that trajectory sort of head off the more sort of negative trajectory? I don't, any thoughts about that? I mean, do you think that that's an accurate perception? Is that something that you have noticed? Or yeah, what do you think about that?
That's what I call a Wizard of Oz question.
Okay.
Which is that if I answered it, you should run, because I absolutely don't know, and no one else does either. And what's so beautiful about the dynamics, of course, I see the dynamics that you're describing. And I try to look at them through a more compassionate lens. And that is that I feel that when there's too much uncertainty in people's lives and in their environment and the broader sensibility, whether it's political, economic, or other, when people's identity is shaken and in doubt, really, because of the assumptions that underlay and inform that identity are no longer trustworthy or valid, then people are very susceptible to demagoguery, to nativism, to populism, and to fascism, for that matter. And so fascism really grew out of the Versailles Treaty in World War I, and what we did and humiliate the Germans and sort of broke the back of that economy. And then you had runaway inflation and people losing everything. And I don't know how many people here are German or but I mean, German people are really smart. So how could they become fascists, proto-fascists? How could they become Nazis? How could they think that Jews were other? I mean, that's what happens when people lose a false identity, nevertheless, but an identity for real. And so we're in that situation, and I feel like that is affecting people on the left as well. I mean, there's, spirituality, there's QAnon, there's lots of yoginis and, are very much anti-vax and this and that and have all sorts of. So I just think it's something that is emblematic of the uncertainty that is both intuitively known and actually seen and experienced by people. And so I do feel like we're going to an era of kind of a wild era, and it could very well end up being totalitarian. It could end up other ways too. But I do want to say one thing about that, which is that I have many, you're a group, BAC, but I mean, I know many NGOs and around the world and people who are doing really wonderful things that are addressing social justice, addressing climate, addressing biodiversity, addressing really the systemic connections between them. They're not so separate, of course. And whether it's on energy or farming or food or healthcare or health, really. And I could go on and on. And I think a lot of them feel like, well, we are the ones who have the solutions. We're the ones who are working towards a benign outcome for humanity. But when we look around us, there's nobody following, or there's very few. In other words, we're not getting a lot of airplay, we're not getting a lot of attention, we're not getting, of course. And what I say to them is that you're rehearsing the future. And what I mean by that is that we're all the same when we reach a point of confusion or in our life. It could be in our body, it could be in our our mind, it could be in anything. Who do we turn to? We turn to those people who have some mastery, who have spent time, who have studied, thought, in the case of Buddhism, practiced, that's who we turn to. So we're in the same situation ecologically as ecosystems and biomes, fall apart, degrade one by one, and those impacts are experienced all over the world. There's a burgeoning regeneration movement all over the world as well. And it's small in the sense each organization isn't very big. You're not very big, And so it's easy no one sees that it's there at all, but they are there. And that's who humanity is going to turn to, regardless of their belief system or what they think caused it, or this person who's, maybe a demagogue, or some church, that's got some wild theories about life and death. It doesn't matter. When that happens, people turn to those whose lives actually are exemplary in terms of making those connections between each other, between people and nature, and reconnecting nature itself. So it's a very fertile, maybe that's a nice word to say, but it's a very fertile time. And that's witnessed by, I don't know whether COVID and Black Lives Matter and, those things were, coincided for some mystical reason or not. But the point being is that COVID just, pulled away the curtain and the BS of a colonial culture in this country. And and the settler mindset, and so we haven't done much. We've done a lot about it. We haven't done enough about it. But boy, the world looks completely different now than it did 18 months ago, and that's because of realizations and awareness that has been brought to us by people with courage and bravery and so forth, and by stupid, police people too, who've basically assassinated, brown and black people, and but for the first time in my life anyway, I mean, I was involved with the civil rights movement, I worked down there, but for the first time in my life, I feel like, truth is coming out, and it's not a happy truth in a sense. It's a very painful truth to see, experience, and realize. We had just Thanksgiving, Wampanoag, tribes, I mean, tribe now, but I mean, they had all the land from Massachusetts to Rhode Island. Come on, and during the Trump administration, they had 300 acres left in Massachusetts, and Trump tried to decertify them, not Trump, somebody there, but decertify them, so they would just be like land that they had to pay taxes on and all. I mean, it was just, so and Thanksgiving was the beginning of genocide, specifically to those people and many others as well. It was not the beginning of gratitude. We always should celebrate gratitude every year, maybe every day, but certainly have an annual celebration. But that is an unfortunate day to choose. We should be really in mourning and try to make amends, to those we have harmed so horrifically and so much. So it's very, like I said, it's a very rich time right now, and I feel like, the people in the climate movement talk about climate injustice, which is true. You don't have the economic means to deal with, the weather, the flooding, this or that. You live on low-lying land. You live downwind from a polluting, chemical plant in Louisiana. I mean, all these things beset people with modest means, and but I feel, I just feel like we have to fundamentally understand that injustice created global warming.
Mm.
That's the cause of it.
Mm.
And it causes more injustice, for sure. No question about that. I don't dispute that one at all. But if you really look at the fundamental causes, I mean, it started, like, hey, how about slavery? How about the Portuguese going to West Africa first, and then the English? How about the slave trade? What was that all about? That was about sugar and tobacco, and I mean, and money, that that is an extractive economy. We are in an extractive economy right now. It's sanitized somewhat, mostly, not entirely.
Yes.
And we look at stock and New York Stock Exchange and this and, oh, how's your portfolio? How's your 401k? It's doing really well. Well, maybe, but again, it's extractive.
Yes. And I've also heard you say that a sustainable economy um, m- won't necessarily be capitalist, but might possibly be a capitalist economy. Um, do you, or I believe that's what I what I heard you say, and I was in another interview. I mean, but that brings up the question of capitalism, right? So, do you think it's possible to have what do you think it's possible for capitalism to ever create a sustainable economy? Because obviously it's a system that's based on continuous growth and extraction. So yeah, what do you think? What do you think about that? Like where we need to go as an economy, and also, maybe kind of tied into that, I had wanted to ask you about the concept of degrowth, which, the intentional shrinking of our economies, especially in like the Western, developed world. So yeah, you can kind of take that anyway, jump in anywhere you want.
Um, I think capitalism, G.K. Chesterton was once asked what he thought of Christianity. And he said, I think it's great. I hope somebody practices it someday. And I feel the same thing about capitalism, which is capitalism is supposed to value capital, okay, and preserve and protect it, except it's only financial capital. It's not intellectual capital, social capital, natural capital. Those things go by the wayside. So I don't think it's capitalism. Number two, capitalism is just a name that got plopped onto an enormously exploitative economy. And like I say, it started very much, corporations started, in the 16th century, because if you were going out, and taking things from around the world and bringing it back to London or the Netherlands or wherever, and if your boat sank or if you lost some of it, you would go to debtor's prison, so would your family. And say, well, that's not working very well. So we'll make corporations and they have limited liability. So that's where the limited liability came from, LLC, incorporated, etc. And that was to protect basically the people who were exploiting the new world, which is not new at all. There was 5,000 indigenous cultures in that world, and as takers, so that protected them as takers. Nobody used the word capitalism. To me, commerce is sacred. Now, commerce is different than capitalism. So we really, really want to make a distinction. When Lewis and Clark got to the Northwest, there was wampum, there was, that was made of shells from Patagonia. Well, come on. I mean, that means those trade routes from Patagonia all the way up through Mesoamerica and to the Americas found their way in Washington. I don't know what found their way back. I mean, the point was there was an exchange system. And in commerce, there's things like credit, that's to believe, credit, credo, cadere, so forth. So at the core of commerce actually is trust between human beings. And I feel that's sacred, and has been with us for a long, long time. The overlay we see right now is something very, very different. In terms of degrowth, it's not a term I think I would use. I don't think negative terms are appealing to people, and therefore they're not going to get involved. I think the question is, we all want growth. The question is, what do we want to grow? What? We don't want to grow our bodies to a certain point. After a certain point, we do not want to grow our bodies, okay? So there we make a decision, I don't really want to grow more, but that doesn't mean we stop growing, and hopefully never until we pass, And so to me, it's got to be a better word than degrowth. I get the point, which is that
right. It's like actually shrinking the GDP, but it's an interesting point that you're making.
It's not necessarily shrinking the GDP. It's shrinking the amount of input and material that's going into what's creating the GDP. And that's what I say is, like, we have an extractive, degenerative, economy, but the point being in this, as I said, or maybe I didn't say earlier, we can see the end of that road now. Before it was like, hallelujah, more money, more houses, more this, more freeways, more cars, more. We can see that road doesn't go very much further. And so regeneration is saying, well, it's time to do a 180, because why would you keep going that direction? It's going to end. So it's a 180 pivot at putting life at the center of every act and decision. And somebody could look at that and say, well, that's very idealistic of you, very altruistic, that's very noble, blah, blah, blah. And I say, no, it's very pragmatic. It's very pragmatic, because if we're going to endure, if we're going to create a world worth saving, if we're going to save the world, we have to create a world worth saving. And to do that, we have to actually create more. And the thing about the 5,000 indigenous cultures, roughly 5,000, is that they were keystone species. And what I mean by that is like beavers and hummingbirds and wolves and those keystone species in nature. And that's defined as a species that creates more life for other species, just in the natural way of living. It's just the way they live. Beavers make dams. They don't think they're keystone species. They are, okay? And nor do honeybees, nor do hummingbirds, nor do wolves. And so if you look at those cultures, the way they lived was they knew that their truth, if you will, as a culture was to leave the world better than they found, leave their forests, leave their plains, leave where they live, their habitat better for their children and their children's children. So that's comes that seventh generation, that idea of seven generations, thinking that far ahead. But there's a really beautiful essay about Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, who's a Chadi and Rudabi pastoralist in the book. And she was talking once about, yes, we thought it 7 generations ahead, like the Onondaga and the Haudenosaunee and so forth. But I said, what people don't understand is that we remembered exactly what happened 7 generations ago. And what happened is when, after the papal edict, 1496 or whatever, that basically the doctrine of discovery, where Europeans swept over, indigenous lands everywhere in the world and brutalized them, took whatever they wanted, etc. Before that, so forth, that happened, there was a sensibility. So you could imagine if you're Hindu Ibrahim and she could remember 7 generations back and forward, she sees herself in a way that we do not see ourselves. We do not see ourselves that way. And for her to break that covenant, of people and culture and time is like unthinkable. It's unthinkable to do that. So when I think of what regeneration is, practically speaking, it's actually an economy that creates more life. In other words, you do something and you do it. Regenerative agriculture is exactly what regenerative agriculture does. And this is not like, hopefulness. Nestle, the biggest food company in the world, 150 years old, one who shamelessly sold baby formula in Africa, and just like, what were you thinking? And years ago, but nevertheless, that mud sticks. 8 weeks ago, committed, and I know the CEO, and I'm very, very good man, to converting the 1 million farms that are in the supply chain to regenerative agriculture. And they're not doing it because to be altruistic, it is, not to be idealistic, it is. They're doing it because they've been in business for 150 years, and they know that if they don't, they won't be in business much longer, because farms are failing, industrial agriculture is failing. And it's failing because amplified by drought and too much water, too little water, by heat and so forth. They're the biggest coffee producers in the world. Switzerland is. It's like, come on, they don't grow coffee. The biggest chocolate producers in the world. Switzerland, cacao and coffee, and Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and Colombia and Ecuador and so forth. So they're working with 600,000 smallholders, 400,000 large farmers, and they've budgeted $1.5 billion to work with the farmers to make a just transition. So interesting. And I wish Hillary Clinton had gone to West Virginia and said, we owe you so much. You energized this country, you heated the country, you powered the country, you paid for it, with your life, with your health and so forth. And if I am elected president, I will absolutely do everything I can to make this transition as profitable, as beneficial, as honoring, as respectful as I possibly can, because we owe it to you, instead of calling them deplorables or people who voted for Trump. And so that, so that's where we are. I think in terms of, we have, if we have GDP and we're measuring degeneration, you can regenerate and call it GDP too.
Mm-hmm.
You have sales, you have transactions, you have products, you have food, you have things, you make things. So we don't have to give up GDP. Capitalism itself is just a name that got dropped on top of this economy that seems very polite and nice, or for some people anyway. But as I said, it's really an extractive, exploitative economy that we have been the beneficiaries of.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm hearing as you're talking, because you're speaking about like how we phrase things, how we talk to people, how we just name what we're talking about. And one of the things I'm hearing as you're speaking about it, which also circles back around to Buddhism, is just skillfulness. Being skillful in how you are, um, just how you're expressing yourself and how what you're saying is landing on other people, which I think is something that just I mean, as a society, as individuals, is something just important to be mindful of, because it is so easy to, like what you said about degrowth and that emphasis on like, well, because you're kind of shrinking, things. But you can look at it in a different way, that you're actually, you're increasing life. I think that's like I'm a therapist, so I think in terms of like reframing, that's a super important reframing, which I think makes all the difference in the world. So I just wanted to kind of like point that out, because yeah, that's very important.
Well, you pointed out something that I didn't say yet, which is that to me, regeneration creates possibility,
Mm,
much more possibilities than the current economy does. And furthermore, if you look at the solutions and challenges in Nexus, and just look at them, just read the description of, 2, 3 word descriptors, and then imagine a world where there was no climatology, there's no climatologist, there was no scientists. We never studied climate, right? And that we were clueless as to extreme weather. Hurricane Ida, oh, it's a bummer. Man, it was a big one. That was it. There's no other discussion. We would want to do every one of these solutions because they have cascading benefits for humanity. And I mean humanity. I mean the 4.3 billion people the World Bank classifies as people living in impoverished conditions. But actually, the overwhelming number of people in the world today live not worried about future existential threat, but about current existential threat. They wake up to it. And it's about food, it's about security, food security, it's about education, it's about warmth, it's about clothing, it's about housing, it's so many things. And that's what they wake up to deal with every single day. And I think, with all due respect to the climate movement, it came out of very privileged people, and they're looking at it as a technical fix. And not to say that there aren't great technologies, and bring them on, thank you very much. But if we think that we can, like in a Bill Gatesian way, fix it with this machine and direct air capture and the renewables, and now we have a new type of nuclear power and all this sort of stuff, and I'm listening to that and going, are you kidding? Because you can ruin the world with renewable energy just as easily with non-renewable. You can cut down the Amazon with a renewably charged battery powered chainsaw. Come on. So if we're not looking at the underlying, so talking about injustice of our economic system, and if we don't realize that there's no such thing as a poor person, there's only a human being living in impoverished conditions. And if you want to understand poverty, you just go back upstream and see who's benefiting. And then you understand what poverty is. Somebody is benefiting or some. And so we have to, I think, my opinion, but I believe that unless the gateway to reversing global warming actually is a world that eliminates poverty, not because it tries to fix it. People who live in poverty don't want to be fixed. They want to fix it themselves. They have pride just like any other human being. The people, come on. And we treat them like they're a thing, And the solutions in Nexus and so forth are what do that. And so it's not about do we have a solution to global warming and climate change and climate crisis, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, we do. But we have a much bigger solution than that, which is to bring the world back to life, bring the earth back to life, and that brings us back to life. That's what this is about. It's bringing us back to life.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Uh, I wanted to ask about just indigenous people and so about 5% of the world's population are indigenous people, but they have ownership of or control over about 25% of the land. And you know, you talk in Regeneration about the importance of just, you know, respecting the rights of indigenous people. And it's become, for me, like increasingly evident that that if we want to protect the environment, if we want to support life, that this is an absolutely important part of it. Supporting indigenous people in defending their rights. Would you like to say any more about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, every human being deserves respect, period. And obviously, I think we have to do more than respect. I think we have to make amends, just like we have to make
Yeah.
amends for African Americans who were taken away from their homelands, and others too, you know. So if we're not thinking amends, I'm not thinking very clearly, in my opinion, because
Oop, did I freeze or oops? I see Chad.
I
Did we lose?
think
Did we
I
lose
think
Paul?
Paul got logged out.
no, I'm back
So
in. No, I'm
He's
back
back.
in.
oh, he's
There you
back
okay.
in. Great.
Okay, good. So you were
But
talking about making
remember,
amends, or more
making
than.
amends, yeah, and because that is what it does to, I don't know who benefits more, the person who receives the amends or the person who's doing the amends. That's hard to say, really, you know. But there's much more to this interconnection and respect for indigenous cultures, which is that we were a literate culture. We were Europeans. We could write and read and all that sort of stuff. And so we found people who were illiterate. Okay, that's what the term we used. And they couldn't write, they couldn't read. And so we took that as a sign of understanding or intelligence, you know, which is so interesting. But what we didn't realize is that indigenous people practice what I call observational science. There's another scientist who practiced that's called Charles Darwin. And that is, it's based on place, you know, with Galapagos. That's observational science, just not theory. And we come from culture where science is empirical, and if you can't repeat an experiment, it's not really true. And they are cultures where nothing repeats itself. It's called nature. It never repeats. And so their science is about pattern recognition and connections. And so what we did when we came, whatever, the Europeans, you know, came to the New World, you know, El Dorado, gold, somehow we're looking for the treasure. We did. There was gold and over there, of course, and we stole it. It was stolen, but we missed the treasure. And the treasure is this extraordinary, intimate knowledge of place, which we completely lack today. And I'll give you two examples of that. One is I met a Yupik woman on a plane to Alaska, and she was going there because her elder sister had died, and she was the elder now, and just talking about that. And they live in the Bering Sea, the Yupiks, both sides of the strait in Russia and in Alaska. Pretty much the most inhospitable place in the world you could live, you know, and they've been there for thousands and thousands of years, so they must know something, right? And so we were talking about that, and she said in a very humble, matter-of-fact way that, you know, they predicted the weather 2 years in advance. I'm going, whoa, wait, stop there. I said, we have 432 satellites, and we can't do it 6 days in advance. And so would you, you know, share with me? And so she did, and she started talking about every single aspect of her environment. You know, I mean, the dozens of types of snow, not just snow, when it fell, when the ice froze, the color of the ice, when did it become thick enough to walk upon, the velvet, if you will, on the caribou antlers. In other words, I mean, just the grasses, the birds, clouds, even the shape of clouds,
Mm.
and they remembered that for years. And what indigenous people have is an extraordinary hippocampus. We don't need one. We just look
Mm.
at our notes. We can just read it up. We can look it up. Google made it even worse. And so they remembered what things were happening 2 years prior. And then they'd have a certain weather event and then go back and say, and correlate. It's called pattern recognition, basically. And there is one more story, which is in Blessed Unrest about the Mi'kmaq people who were Inuits, Inuit too, and they came down into Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And you talked about the mother trees. If they went by a mother tree, a big tree in the forest, they would stop and they could listen to the wind soughing through the branches. That sound became the name of the tree.
Mm.
Okay, they never forgot the name. It was never written down. Everybody knew the name. That tree was called whatever. 5 years later, 10 years later, they could walk by the tree, listen, and if the sound had changed, they knew something had happened to the tree. And if it was the same, they knew the tree was healthy. Now, it's in the name. We don't even have a language. We have 3 million words, and we cannot name a tree sound.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's what I mean about observational science. It's extraordinary amount of, especially in the elders, of insight and knowledge and so forth, which we would benefit so much. And they want to share it, of course, and to teach us how to live here.
Yes.
It's funny to hear people about, Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. I said, great, go, but you don't know how to live here.
Right.
So how could you possibly figure that one out? Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yes. Last question from me. In 2000, you wrote an article called Skeleton Woman in Seattle about your experiences at the WTO protests in Seattle. The article affected me a lot. I ended up becoming a street medic, at a lot of the large protests. I was in Quebec City and some of the Americas protests. And at the time had great hope for the global justice movement, which ended up, the momentum got completely scuttled after September 11th and the ensuing wars. Can you speak a little bit about what you see, if any, as the legacy of the global justice movement, and just like what impact that
I
had?
think, I think they take movements take different forms. They're adaptive. They're just like our bacteria in our gut and soil microbiome. In other words, small, agile, they reproduce, they die, they reimagine themselves and so forth. So I have on my board, my board is 30% indigenous, 70% women, 60% BIPOC, I mean, so, and I was amazing indigenous women, they're all indigenous women on the board. And Lila June, who's Dene and Cheyenne, we were talking. She said, there's this idea in the Western culture that the Maya culture collapsed. The Chaco Canyon collapsed. The mound builders in the Midwest collapsed. She said, we don't see it that way. We see those cultures have become very arrogant, and they were taken down for sure. But it said the Chaco Canyon people didn't disappear. They are basically Dene and Pueblo. And in other words, and the Mayans did not disappear, but quite a, and so I just see that this is a tumultuous, fermenting time, and so it's not like it came, went, faltered, ended. No, those people like you, what are they doing now? What are they reform, they reorganize, and so that's what Blessed Unrest was about. I mean, which was, and that was, you're right. And I said that the movement to address economic disease and injustice and ecological degradation was humanity's immune response, right? And that collectively we are like an immune system. And what we know about immune systems applies to regeneration and what we're doing on many levels, which is the way you heal a system is to connect more of it to itself. It'll heal itself. And that goes back to social justice. You can't heal this system with apartheid, whether it's subtle or actual, or racism. It won't, you can't cure it. It won't heal. It's impossible. So this is what science teaches us. It's true with ecosystems, social systems. And so the fundamental cause of global warming is this profound disconnection between each other and between us and nature, and between nature itself through habitat fragmentation and acidification. And so our work is very clear as human beings, which is let's start reconnecting these broken strands that have been sundered and in some case ravaged, by others and by capitalism, by companies, by dictators, by beliefs, by religion. And let's put this one back together. That's the only way it happens. It doesn't happen in Glasgow. It just can't. It happens on the ground.
Right. That's something that, that I've also definitely noticed that, I was reading this book while the COP26 meetings were going on, while the battle over the budget bill here, that had a lot of good, started out with a lot of good climate provisions, still has a few, was happening, and just noticing that, I mean, it was already clear, but just it became very stark that the solution is not going to be, as much as it would be wonderful for the governments to take the lead. It does not seem like that is likely to happen.
No, the world and societies are just like our bodies. They're self-organizing systems. And so the purpose of regeneration, people ask me, what was your purpose? I said, to create the conditions for self-organization. It's not, and like, who's in charge of your body? Not you. You in charge of inputs, so that's fine for sure, but not your body. And that's the same with the whole of this earth and society. It's like nobody's in charge. People can pretend they are. They can make fools of themselves saying they are. They can kill it, which they do all the time, but that doesn't make them in charge.
Right. Good point. So we have a small amount of time left. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Oh, Karsten Struhl. Karsten Struhl has raised a hand. So, Karsten.
Yeah, if I may, I have three, but they're each short questions. One is just about...
I think we're going to wrap up by 9.
Okay. One is about climate change, the very term and I think you're right in saying there's a problem with the term, but is there a problem if you change the term, climate instability, climate chaos, because it isn't just global warming. Global warming has a climate manifestation of chaos, instability, and so forth, which is affecting. So I wonder, so the first question is just simply, would you accept some term like that?
Absolutely. Let me answer that question, then I'll get to the next one, which is yes, we use the term climate disruption, climate weirding, all those things work. So go, and yours do too.
Great. So the second question is about climate injustice as it is going on now. As bad as we're experiencing in the global north, what is being experienced in the global south is so much worse. So I'd love you to say something about that. And maybe let me just ask my third question, because it's tied in with that, which is the question of how this is going to happen without a very large scale global reorganization of production and finance, given that whether you want to call it a capitalist system or something else, the global system has the imperative of exponential growth, is an exploitative system, and so on and so forth. And unless there's some large scale planning to grow some things and degrow others, it's not clear how that will solve the problem.
The second question was a statement, and I agree, by the way. The third question was also a statement, but what I'd like to say to that is that the climate movement in the most amorphous and encompassing sense of that word, okay, and not an organization, not EDF or something, but those people in all over the world who are actually doing something about it, or the impacts of it in terms of resiliency, in terms of adaptation, in terms of changing out their energy systems, everything. Okay, that movement will become the biggest movement on Earth. Mm-hmm. No question. And the reason is because of weather, not because of a leader, some charismatic leader, somebody's going to rise up. No, because of weather. And so what happens when that, I don't know, but I know that the old presumptions, if you will, or assumptions about what should or shouldn't be and what we, are gone, they're taken away. And so that's, I think you have the matrix of a massive reorganization, as opposed to it being reorganized in a thoughtful or thoughtless way by whom, I don't know when or how, but and so your statement is correct. That's what's needed, but I don't think it's going to arise out of somebody seeing a priori that is needed and that we're going to get together and meet and talk about how to change our priorities. No, it's going to change because people say, use my friends, like, oh shit, man, this is the real deal. It is, and then who are you going to do? Who are you going to turn to? Who are you going to talk to? Who are you going to trust? Who are you going to, and that's that reorganization that you talked about, but I just think it's going to come about in that way.
Thank you.
Jenny, BAC's own Jenny O'Donnell.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Paul, for coming on. So this morning, I was just listening to NPR like I do religiously for some reason. And it was very strange because I rarely ever hear them talk about options to our current capitalistic system. And their question that they posed was, if we don't base our current economy on consumption, what are we going to base it on? And they've sort of flumbled around for a while and gave some suggestions, but I was flabbergasted. And from listening to all of the suggestions that you've made about veering away from extraction economies and all these different solutions, I was literally shouting at my iPhone, well, we could do this or that or this or that. So it occurs to me, and I took a drawdown workshop like in early 2019 before the pandemic went down. And there are so many solutions, and it seems that communication to the mainstream through mainstream media is very lacking. How can we fix that so that all of these various solutions that are great possibilities can be put out to the public. I'm so frustrated by that because we never seem to talk about all these solutions that I read about and that I see on Drawdown and all of the different organizations that you participate in. I would love to help disseminate that information.
Take a look at, this is for anybody, take a look at your media, whether it's NPR, the Washington Post, the New York Times, or whatever, and take a piece of paper and put a line down the middle, and one of them put amygdala, and the other one put neocortex. And then when you see something, check which one is trying to ignite, and what you'll find it's 10-to-1, amygdala to neocortex. And that keeps the readers, it's clickbait, click-throughs and so forth. The whole media, whether it's CNN or Fox, it doesn't make any difference at all. It's about the amygdala. And our amygdala lights up more easily because that's how we survived, I mean, the same thing holds true with why do we eat ultra-processed food. 60% of the food that Americans eat is ultra-processed food. I call it a chemical experiment in my book. I don't think it's food, but it's fat, sugar, and salt. And that's because for hundreds of thousands of years, those are very hard to come by. Honey, salt, and fat, right? And so we learned that when we got them, we shared them and ate them. We didn't, we couldn't buy it. We couldn't get it on demand. So the amygdala is, a very important part of the brain, very important, everybody talks about, running away from the tag or whatever, but it's more subtle than that. But the fact is that it functions and it works well. Now, when you exploit it, it's extractive. That's another form of extraction because you're extracting basically fear from people in order to retain them as customers, as readers, as whatever. And you do it on various levels of intelligence, dumb as a post all the way to very literate, publications, there's some exceptions, but I mean, you look at the Atlantic now since Loreen Paul Jobs bought it, it's so much better, but it's still, I would say the 10-to-1 thing still applies, to the Atlantic. So yeah. But I love that NPR did that. That's so cool. I'm glad you got excited about it. It's so true. It's like, what do you mean? Good, yeah.
I muted myself. We maybe have time for like one more quick question. Does anybody, I'm not seeing any other hands up, so maybe
We're good, huh?
Everybody's feeling good. Everybody got some good, I have a Doha. Okay, this is the last question.
Hi, Paul. It was great share. I guess following previous question, so you mentioned amygdala vs neocortex 10-to-1, and a lot of problem of capitalism probably is based on that. Roots of our biological body falls behind the current development of the society and technology. And I wonder, is there a path that we can evolve into a better, so not being extracting or exploited by capitalism, because that's the kind of nature that we are all hunter-gatherers body. Yeah, I guess that's my question. What's the path we could for everybody to take on? Thanks. Thank you very much.
I'm so fascinated by these large, overarching, global questions. It's a good question, Doha. I actually don't think that way. I think about things, I'm very pragmatic and very practical. And I think about things as and I'll say this myself, what can I do? And the second part of the second essay in the book is called The Agency, because the climate movement, if you will, has alternated between this is what you can do, you as Doha, cold water, don't use plastic, ride a bike, don't eat so much meat, and then and most people who, when they see that list, they know it's insufficient to the task at hand. It's like this. And then we've been trained to then look at the Conference of the Parties or big corporations or the governments or the Biden administration or whatever, and somehow they're going to solve it. And what we've missed in all that is what's in between those two. And the beautiful thing about a human being is they're made of cells, and the dream of every cell is to become two cells. That's what every cell wants to do. And so every human being actually is not an individual. That's a myth. That's just delusion. We wake up with that delusion every morning, but it's simply not true. We are part of very complex and nuanced networks, and connections. And that is where the solutions reside in terms of the questions you're asking, which are very good questions, by the way. I'm not taking away from the question, but they don't reside in a global sense, in an overriding sense, in some large sense. They reside with us, our family, our friends, our sangha, who we associate with, and that's what's, I think, overlooked, which is individuals can become a dyad, become 4, become 8, become 16, become 32, and so forth. All the great movements in the world, whether it's Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King, whatever, started with one person. And each of us is one person, but that doesn't mean we're an individual. We are actually much, much more than that. I think, for me, we talked about 2001 and 9/11 happened then. It did change everything. No one knew how it would change everything, but what I decided at that time is I didn't know what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I really didn't know. I was confused, well, what to do now. And I decided that what I would do is try to be helpful. It's like something I could do every day for the rest of my life is just be helpful. And as if I said something, if I wrote something, if I made something or bought something, whatever. But I mean, and I fail every day. So don't get me wrong here, but I practice every day. And it's how I feel I can be of the most influence in the world, as opposed to being an influencer, and having on the internet or something like that, social media, is to be that person on a daily level. And we can all do that. And it's really, it sounds maybe inadequate to the task at hand. It is more than adequate to the task at hand, because there is no other way. There is no other way. And as I said earlier, when the weather changes, and it is changing, more and more people will realize that. Sometimes this is not the audience to do this with, but I'm going to do it anyway. Sometimes I have audiences that are a little bit, I wouldn't say glib, but sort of been there, done that, seen that, kind of about climate, and yeah, we know, and this is them, kind of. And I said, well, this was the hottest summer in recorded human history. And people nod sagely, yep, mm-hmm. I said, this is the coldest summer for the rest of your life. Now, what do you want to do? Why are you here? If you're not here to regenerate life on Earth, why are you here? That's my question, for myself and for everybody. And to me, we're being homeschooled by our Mother Earth. We're being homeschooled. It's our home. We're being schooled. It's called feedback. And any system that ignores feedback perishes. We may perish as a culture and civilization. But the feedback is basically lesson plan number 1, be in alignment with life itself. It's lesson number 1, And it's so clear. And rather than seeing climate disruption or, what was the word you used? Climate, you had a different word, I forgot, but, but the different words, you know, crisis, you know, obviously all these different words for the emergency. But rather than seeing it as a curse or something really bad that is happening and is happening to me, and gosh, I wish it didn't. I prefer to see this as a gift, as an honoring, as an offering from the earth to us. I mean, that's what it is, really. It's saying, and if you look at it from that point of view, the earth is being very gentle, saying, gosh, you didn't listen to that one. Let me try this way. Let me do it really, like the flood in Egypt. I don't know if you read about it, but it's like, it's so biblical. The flood in Egypt 2 days ago, it had so much rain they'd never seen before. Millions of scorpions came out of the ground and invaded people's homes and bit them too, you know, because they were drowning. And so they came up, you know, the earth, that's where they live, underneath the soil. And so there's all these beautiful and quite dramatic, you know, teachings that are coming. And I choose to accept them as a gift, you know, and as a guide, as a teacher, which is what they are. Yeah.
Thank you
Excellent.
so much for the profound inspiration you
You're so welcome,
planted
Doha.
within me. Thanks.
You're so welcome.
Yes, and that's I think that's a great place to leave things. I had a request for us to sit for a minute before parting. So I'll invite us to do that. And again, you know, please you know, follow up with Paul's work, regeneration.org. Especially the Nexus section. Again, lots of wonderful info. And I believe Eric had previously posted in the chat about where to donate to this work. So please check that out. So, okay, so let's just sit for just 1 minute and before we part.
May I do a bell, Donna?
You may do a bell, absolutely. All right. Thank you, Paul,
Thank you,
for
Paul.
so generously spending the time with us this evening. And thanks for everyone who came. And we'll have a lot of times folks contact me afterwards to ask about the recording. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel as soon as we get a chance. Sometimes it takes a couple weeks. So yeah. But
Thank you so much, Paul.
Oh, you're so
Thank
welcome.
you so much.
Yeah.
And for mentioning the indigenous folks of the world. and about, you know, I can't even think anymore. It's late. um,
What do you want to
answering,
say? Yeah,
answering to what has happened to a lot of us,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and this observational science that my elders had and that I've
Yes.
lost.
Yes. Well,
So
the
thank you.
for example, the Dene have 700 stories that describe 700 different insects.
Mm.
Who even, except an entomologist, as a PhD, who even knows how to name or the names of 700 different insects? And these stories are remembered and passed on. That's what I'm talking about, the hippocampus. It's like, so we literate people miss this one by a country mile, because we just didn't slow down, and and the precursor to skillful means, which you're talking about, Donna, is actually listening, just and really listening, and creating that opening so you can hear those voices, Yeah. Which culture are you from, Dorothy?
I'm from the Gadang tribe in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I,
my on my mother's side, and she kind of failed to. I don't want to say she failed. Um, she had to come over to the U.S., to work,
right.
to support the family and extended families. So in that way, we were all here in New York, and none of the Gadang traditions got passed on to us, and now not to the grandchildren either. I'm trying to kind of reconnect with the elders back home, but that's hard because they don't have the Zoom or technological. They don't want
Right.
to be. They can, but they don't.
Right.
The wiring is not.
I agree.
They don't. Yeah, they're not into that kind of.
I have 3 Philippine grandchildren, all named after angels, by the way. So, so it is amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
you.
Good night,
Thank you, Paul.
everybody.
Good night.
Right.